They say wars end when the guns fall silent, but silence can lie. Beneath the ashes of cities and treaties, something older breathes, a machinery of secrets turning in the dark, built not from steel, but from fear, ambition, and the promise of resurrection. In the shadows of victory parades, files were burned, names rewritten, and corridors sealed with the dust of vanished men. The true front lines never dissolved. They just sank deeper, hidden behind diplomatic smiles and unmarked crates. Somewhere between history and myth, there are stories too dangerous to be remembered and too deliberate to be forgotten. What was buried in the ruins of the last Great War was not peace. It was a pact, silent and enduring, meant to guard truths that could never see daylight. And in the stillness of forgotten archives, that pact is starting to stir again. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Harpseal. In the winter of 1945, the North Atlantic became a corridor of silence. The convoy designated JW-77, part of the Arctic run from Scapa Flow to Murmansk, departed under the cover of storm fronts and blackout discipline. Officially, it was a resupply mission for the Soviet Northern Front. Unofficially, within the Admiralty's Naval Intelligence Division, it carried a code name whispered only once in the minutes of a meeting on January 29th, Operation Harpseal. Its manifest was handwritten, not typed, and bore the signatures of both British and American officers. Unusual for such a minor convoy. The lead freighter, SS Morven Castle, contained classified industrial cargo, joint research property of OSS and RAF Section T. The second escort, HMS Petrel, carried 2 officers from the US Office of Scientific Research and Development and 1 Soviet liaison whose identity remains uncertain even in post-war archives. On February 12th, the convoy's last signal was received. Visibility 0, barometer falling, convoy intact. At 2300 hours, the signals ceased. No mayday, no intercept, no radar echo. Soviet air patrols dispatched from Vanga base reported no sighting of wreckage. Days later, an RAF Liberator crew detected an oil slick and fragments of lifeboats near Jan Mayen Island. When the report reached London, the Admiralty immediately sealed the findings under Polar Weather Discrepancy File. For decades, the Harpseal disappearance remained an obscure naval mystery, overshadowed by larger tragedies like PQ-17. But in 1978, Norwegian diver Erik Luken discovered a twisted section of hull in the Barents Sea during a private expedition. The fragment bore partial lettering, more, and an unmarked alloy plate welded into the keel, unlike any British fabrication of the era. Luken's notes describe an inscription stamped beneath layers of corrosion. Kriegsmarine Testbed, 1244. He turned the plate over to the Norwegian Maritime Authority, but the artifact vanished en route to Oslo. In 1983, a declassified US Navy memorandum, File 4417A, recovered materials, Northern Theatres, surfaced briefly before being reclassified. It referenced unidentified vessel fragments retrieved by Cooperative Arctic Mission, adding cryptically, sample composition inconsistent with Allied metallurgical standards. Alloy suggests field splicing of German and British manufacture. The report's signature belonged to Commander Everett L. Haynes, later attached to Project Paperclip transfers. Haynes died of a reported embolism in 1952, 3 days before testifying to a Senate subcommittee on captured technologies. What exactly Harpseal carried remains speculative. One theory, advanced by historian Dr. Annika Voller in her 2009 paper, The Arctic Interface, proposes that it transported radar jamming prototypes derived from captured Würzburg systems. Another, based on OSS fragments recovered in 1996, points to an entirely different purpose. An exchange. A fragment of an OSS memorandum dated February 8, 1945 reads, "Delivery of agreed materials. Contingent on Soviet consent. Project Silver. Ice must proceed irrespective of front. Developments." The phrase silver ice appears in no other wartime record. Soviet sources deepen the mystery. The Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense in Podos contains a file marked Meteorologicheski Episode 1245, which references foreign vessels lost during abnormal magnetic interference in polar sectors. The file includes a decrypted transmission reportedly intercepted by Soviet listening posts at Cape Jelania. Translated, it reads, "Frequency shift confirmed. Non-standard echo pattern repeating. advised termination. The file was sealed under the authority of General Andrei Vlasov's intelligence directorate and not reopened until 1992. Researchers granted access to partial transcripts claim the recording, when analyzed, produces a harmonic pulse far below human audibility, a pattern consistent with sonar but with no known origin. In the decades that followed, fragments of the truth emerged through contradiction. US Navy records deny any convoy under that code name. British naval logs for February 1945 omit JW-77 entirely. Yet Soviet shipping manifests from Murmansk record receipt of electronic parts, category unknown, origin foreign. The quantity was minimal, but the consignment date, March 4, 1945, falls exactly 3 weeks after Harpseal's disappearance, when journalist Richard Fenwick filed a Freedom of Information request in 1991. The British Ministry of Defence responded with a single page, a heavily redacted document listing losses, North Atlantic, February 1945, unconfirmed. In the margin, handwritten in fading ink, appears Harpseal Convoy, Silence Protocol, Gold Key. No file under that classification exists today. In 2005, Lucan's widow received an anonymous parcel. Inside was a waterproof notebook and a reel of microfilm. The notebook contains sonar grid coordinates and sketches of an object described as cylindrical metallic, diameter 4 meters, depth approximately 120 meters. The microfilm images, later digitized, show blurred underwater photographs of a smooth-sided hull with markings resembling a hybrid of English and German naval fonts. One plate is legible, H-12 OSS Joint 1945. Maritime historian Jürgen Stadler, who reviewed the materials before their confiscation, noted that the alloy composition visible in the images suggested the use of duralumin mixed with tungsten, an impossible combination for large-scale production in the mid-1940s. The implication was that Harpseal was transporting something experimental, possibly even a prototype weapon or energy system, yet more chilling is the Soviet account of a recovered logbook, allegedly taken from a drifting life raft by the trawler Kirovets in late March 1945. The logbook, now held in a private collection in Arkhangelsk, describes increasing malfunctions among the convoy's communications equipment and recurrent echoing signals not originating from known Allied channels. The final entry, written by Lieutenant Edward Price of HMS Petrel, reads, "Midnight, sky luminous, instruments erratic, echo pattern repeating every 14 seconds, orders unclear, preparing to surface antennas." The page ends abruptly, smeared by what investigators believe to be seawater. Some have argued the disappearance was a result of natural causes, a freak magnetic storm, or an accidental detonation of volatile cargo. But the international silence surrounding the case remains suspicious. No family notifications were ever officially dispatched for the lost personnel. Their names do not appear on Commonwealth War Graves records. When queried, the British Admiralty maintains no such operation has ever been recorded. In 2011, fragments of radio chatter captured by declassified US Arctic Command archives surfaced on academic forums. The transmission, dated February 13, 1945, contains an indecipherable Morse pattern followed by a clear phrase, Harpseal transmitting from position Theta 5. Repeat, Harpseal transmitting from Theta 5. The recording ends with static. Analysts determined the coordinates correspond to a sector north of Jan Mayen Island, directly above a region where the ocean floor drops into an unexplored trench. Sonar expeditions in 2014 by Russian research vessel Academic Fyodorov mapped anomalies at that location, metallic reflections spanning 60 meters. Officially, the results were inconclusive. Unofficially, leaked emails between project contractors mention presence of artificial materials inconsistent with post-war debris. Operation Harpseal remains one of the few WWII convoys for which no wreckage, personnel, or documentation can be fully verified. Its disappearance has become a cipher within the broader enigma of wartime intelligence operations, where technological ambition, political secrecy, and human error merged into erasure. Somewhere beneath the frozen Barents depths, perhaps entombed beneath 70 years of shifting ice, lies the answer to a question no government has ever admitted to asking. What was so vital, so dangerous, that every nation involved agreed it must never resurface? Chapter 2. The Iron Cathedral beneath Königsberg. By April 1945, Königsberg was a dying city, bombed into skeletal ruin by the RAF, then crushed under Soviet artillery. The Prussian capital had become a tomb of smouldering stone. Beneath its surface, however, something else was being constructed. Soviet archives unearthed after the Cold War refer to a German initiative codenamed Project Eisenkirche, the Iron Cathedral. Its documentation exists only in fragments, scattered between SS engineering files, intercepted radio traffic, and the surviving notes of a captured engineer, Oberst Heinrich Falz. His interrogation transcript, preserved in the Lubyanka archives, begins with one phrase repeated 3 times. Es ist nicht gebaut worden. It was not built. Yet every record of construction supply shipments into the ruins of Königsberg Castle from late 1944 suggests otherwise. The castle's lower vaults, originally part of a medieval foundation, were commandeered by the Schutzstaffel's Ahnenerbe Research Division. Soviet scouts entering the city on April 7th reported gunfire from the castle's catacombs, though the Wehrmacht had officially abandoned the site 2 days prior. When Red Army forces finally secured the area, they sealed the lower levels due to structural instability. The following day, NKVD engineers reported radiation readings inconsistent with conventional weaponry. This in an era before portable Geiger counters were standard issue. No further excavation occurred until 1948, when Stalin ordered the site to be reopened for technical examination. What they found beneath the stone shocked even hardened investigators. Documents later retrieved from the archives of the 9th NKVD Engineering Battalion describe tunnels lined with metal, melted surfaces, and heavy electrical cabling extending to unknown chambers. A series of crates were discovered, each stamped with the insignia of the SS Ahnenerbe and labelled Turbine Geist, Phase 3. Their contents were confiscated and transported to Moscow. None were ever logged in customs or laboratory records. The tunnels were resealed, and Königsberg Castle was deliberately demolished in 1968 under the pretext of urban reconstruction. In the decades that followed, rumours persisted among former Soviet engineers who had served in Kaliningrad. They spoke of crates emitting faint heat long after being sealed, of incomplete blueprints drawn on lead-backed paper, and of a circular chamber described as an engine without pistons. One engineer, Mikhail Petrovich Gavrilov, later deposed in 1992, recalled a schematic titled Energy Umkehrfeld Apparat, Energy Reversal Field Apparatus. The document, though incomplete, included magnetic field diagrams far beyond the scope of wartime engineering. The West took notice long before the public did. In 1956, declassified CIA correspondence, file German Technical Recoveries, subsection Königsberg, referenced a probable power generation testbed buried beneath the ruins. The memo mentioned an absent physicist, Dr. Erich Gessler, who had been working under SS supervision at Peenemünde prior to the site's bombing. His post-war trail vanished after 1945, yet a 1951 US Air Force intelligence document lists him as a consultant for Project Condor, an experimental propulsion study operating out of White Sands, New Mexico. When the Soviet Union collapsed, parts of the Kaliningrad Regional Archive were opened briefly before being resealed. Among the documents retrieved by historian Pavel Lushin was a requisition order dated June 14, 1945, for the transport of 17 metallic cylinders sealed, dimensions 2.5 am x 0.5 ms. The destination was listed as Podlipki, near Moscow, home to the early Soviet missile and nuclear research facilities. Each cylinder bore a serial prefix beginning with EK45, believed to stand for Eisenkirche. Eyewitness accounts paint a grim picture. A Red Army medic, Irina Volkova, recorded in her diary that several soldiers suffered severe burns after entering one of the chambers. Their skin turned white and cracked, she wrote. The smell was like ozone and copper. Her entry, recovered from a private collection, predates the Soviet Union's first exposure to nuclear materials by several months. If her account is accurate, the Iron Cathedral may have contained a source of radiation, or energy, unknown to both German and Soviet scientists. In 1991, an urban exploration team led by Polish researcher Marek Nowicki rediscovered a sealed access shaft beneath Kaliningrad's Cathedral Square. What they found was a maze of reinforced tunnels extending toward the former castle foundations. Video recordings, though grainy, show melted steel arches and collapsed corridors. In one frame, a rusted sign can be seen partially buried in debris, the word Jaistraum barely legible. Within days of their find being published online, the team was detained by local authorities, and all materials were confiscated. Geological surveys conducted in 2004 using ground-penetrating radar confirmed anomalies beneath the same area, concentric metallic patterns consistent with a buried structure approximately 40 meters below ground. Public records list the site as unstable substratum, access prohibited. Yet, satellite thermal imaging conducted during a 2017 academic study of urban heat flux detected irregular heat emissions at night from beneath the same coordinates. Historians have since attempted to reconstruct the Iron Cathedral's purpose through indirect evidence. A letter from SS Obersturmbannführer Wilhelm Klein to Heinrich Himmler, dated November 1944, references completion of the resonance chamber per the Führer's directive. Another. Our document, an internal memo from the Reich Research Council, describes experiments in vortex-driven current inversion, theorized to convert rotational energy into electromagnetic fields. Whether these documents refer to a legitimate scientific effort or simply Nazi pseudoscience remains uncertain, but their connection to the physical remains found. Beneath Königsberg is undeniable. There are those who believe the Iron Cathedral was an attempt to weaponize power itself, a technological arc meant to outlast the Reich. Others view it as an underground data vault for preserving scientific research, a kind of doomsday archive for a lost empire. Still, others argue it was a test chamber for an energy propulsion system so unstable it was entombed deliberately. The only remaining primary testimony comes from Faltz's own interrogation record, translated in 1994. He described a resonating turbine capable of generating a magnetic field that bent light upon itself. When pressed for clarification, he added, it was meant to lift the weight of the world, but instead it sank beneath it. His phrasing has been dismissed as poetic delirium, yet the technical sketches attached to his statement, spherical rotors, plasma conduits, field capacitors, echo modern designs studied decades later. In 2019, independent researchers using magnetometric sensors reported a persistent anomaly beneath the old castle site, a magnetic gradient fluctuation of 0.7 microteslas, small but constant, seems to emanate from a fixed depth. The phenomenon remains unexplained by geological surveys. Local residents occasionally report low-frequency vibrations audible only during winter nights. The sound, they say, is faint but rhythmic, like machinery far below the ground. If the Iron Cathedral truly existed, it was not merely an engineering project. It was an idea, born from a regime desperate to rewrite the laws of nature as the world collapsed around it. Whatever was built beneath Königsberg, it survived both fire and conquest, waiting in silence beneath modern Kaliningrad. There, beneath the concrete and tram lines, the last experiment of the Third Reich may still hum faintly in the dark, its purpose long forgotten, its machinery still alive. Chapter 3. Echoes from Station Azimuth North. On the Greenland ice shelf, nearly 600 kilometers from the nearest settlement, a structure lies buried beneath 70 years of accumulation. It was discovered in 1963 by a US Air Force weather reconnaissance team, an outpost they were never meant to find. The coordinates corresponded to an abandoned German weather station, officially destroyed in 1944 during Operation Haudegan. Yet inside the station's remains, the team found an intact radio array, a generator still sealed in oil, and, most disturbingly, a faint transmission on shortwave frequency 11.732 MHz repeating every 91 hours. The signal matched an encryption format retired by the Kriegsmarine in 1943. The discovery was immediately classified under NORAD Directive 88B and relabeled Station Azimuth North. Its existence was omitted from Arctic command logs. Declassified correspondence between the Air Weather Service and the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology refers to unknown emissions consistent with VLF band resonance, not of meteorological origin. Analysts who decoded portions of the transmission in 1964 noted the inclusion of a repeated trigraph, TNX, followed by a date, 190445, and a set of coordinates in the Norwegian Sea. That coordinate corresponds to the last known location of the German submarine U-876, which disappeared in April 1945, carrying undisclosed cargo marked scientific instruments. In 1966, a covert team from the US Navy's Arctic Research Laboratory was dispatched to investigate the site. Their classified report, obtained through a partial FOIA release in 2007, described extreme preservation, absence of organic decay, and anomalous cold zones within enclosed space. In the center of the bunker, they found the remains of 5 individuals, still in uniform, seated around a transmitter. Autopsy notes reference an absence of decomposition, as though the bodies had been freeze-dried in situ. One corpse wore a US Air Force parka bearing a 1953 production tag, 9 years after the site was supposedly abandoned. No explanation was given. The report also mentions a metal canister labeled Project Tantalus, Eigentum der Kriegsmarine, property of the German Navy. The canister contained wax-sealed documents and 2 film reels. The reels, later catalogued under Restricted Arctic Phenomena, were never released publicly. An internal CIA memo from 1971 states, reels exhibit exposure anomalies when viewed, likely due to magnetic corruption. Contents induce viewer disorientation and severe headaches. One of the film technicians assigned to restoration, James Hollander, later suffered acute psychological breakdown and was hospitalized until his death in 1985. His wife claimed he woke nightly shouting about men standing in the snow who were not men. The transmissions from station Azimuth North continued until 97. Their content never changed. Bursts of Morse data interspersed with long silences. The repeating tone, once processed through audio spectrography, revealed a subharmonic rhythm matching the resonance frequency of the Earth's magnetic field at that latitude. In plain terms, the station appeared to be broadcasting in synchronization with the planet itself. Engineers attempted to triangulate the precise origin, but found discrepancies of several kilometers, as if the signal's source was shifting. The base itself, later excavated by satellite imagery, was found to contain additional wiring leading downward into the ice, ending in nothing. In 1979, a memo circulated under CIA classification A44912 labeled the entire site compromised by anomalous telemetry interference. Following that year, all research ceased, and the facility was reburied by natural drift. Yet leaked documents from 1982 reveal the Pentagon considered constructing a listening post nearby to monitor low-frequency anomalies linked to the same signal. One of the technical advisors, Dr. Raymond Clark, testified privately that the broadcast appears self-sustaining and non-terrestrial in patterning, suggesting the station had been left to operate autonomously since 1945. Soviet sources mention the site as well. In the archives of the KGB's Northern Division, there exists a 1958 intercept report labeled Operation Kimor. It describes receiving a coded signal in German naval format originating from Sector Kappa 8 on the Greenland ice shelf. The Soviets assumed it was an Allied decoy or US experiment and ignored it. After the Cold War, when joint declassification efforts began, Russian archivists were shocked to find references to the same coordinates, repeated nearly every decade under different designations. When Danish authorities conducted a geological survey of the region in 2001, the team's magnetometers detected faint electromagnetic activity consistent with buried metallic structures. They noted unusually high ice density surrounding a 30-meter radius. Frozen water molecules arranged in a lattice pattern more akin to permafrost than glacial layering. Samples taken from the site showed isotopic anomalies suggesting the ice had melted and refrozen multiple times, as though subjected to periodic bursts of heat or radiation. Among the few surviving first-hand testimonies, one stands out. A radio operator from the original 1963 Discovery team, Sergeant Robert Milner, gave a sealed statement before his death in 1999. His account, declassified in 2010, describes hearing a human voice beneath the signal pattern. "It wasn't words," he wrote, "more like a whisper carried inside the code. Every few minutes it repeated my own call sign, though the transmitter was disconnected." His file was later annotated in red ink. Possible auditory misinterpretation due to fatigue. In 2014, a German historian named Dr. Elsa Weidemann published a paper linking Station Azimuth North to Operation Tantalus, an alleged Kriegsmarine project to test long-range undersea communication using Earth's magnetic resonance. According to captured documents, the system relied on generating standing fields between specific polar coordinates. If the experiment succeeded, it could theoretically enable communication across hemispheres without satellites or radio relays. The project was terminated in 1945 when its lead scientist, Kapitänleutnant Otto Reimer, vanished aboard U-876, the same submarine whose coordinates matched the station's signal. Weidemann's research provoked renewed interest. A team of Norwegian and American researchers revisited the region in 2018 under the guise of climate observation. Their unpublished report, leaked 2 years later, confirms that the transmission had resumed briefly after 2 decades of silence. They recorded 3 bursts identical to the original 11.732 MHz pattern, followed by a longer tone descending in frequency, a signal behavior not possible through mechanical error. Within 24 hours, the signal ceased permanently. No country claims ownership of Station Azimuth North. The Danish government classifies the area as environmentally restricted. The US denies any ongoing interest. Yet satellite data still detects residual electromagnetic resonance matching the original coordinates every winter solstice, lasting precisely 9 minutes. Whether this is coincidence or design remains unknown. When the original OSS post-war archives were digitized, one obscure entry surfaced under Arctic communications. Azimuth transmission continuing post-surrender. Possible autonomous broadcast. Recommend total omission. The entry was dated May 1946, 1 year after the Reich had fallen. Standing in the endless whiteness of Greenland's interior, it is easy to believe that what happened there was buried by both ice and time. But signals, unlike bodies, do not decay, they echo. The transmission of Station Azimuth North, faint and rhythmic, was the heartbeat of a forgotten machine still pulsing beneath the frozen wasteland. A mechanical ghost whispering across decades, its origin erased, its purpose unresolved, its voice lost in static. Chapter 4. The Tokyo Cryptograms of Unit 731 at 0837 on September 2, 1945. As the formal instruments of Japan's surrender were signed aboard the USS Missouri, a courier in a blood-stained uniform arrived at the Imperial Army Medical College in Tokyo. His satchel contained 14 cylindrical canisters, each wrapped in rice paper and stamped with a red kitsune, the fox emblem of Japan's covert biowarfare division. Unit 731. The canisters were not part of any official surrender documentation. Within a week, they were quietly seized by US Counterintelligence Corps officers and relabeled under the codename Project Kitsune. What was on those reels would never appear in the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, nor in any Allied archive, until fragments resurfaced decades later. The reels were phonograph recordings, coded transmissions, spliced with Japanese medical test data and numerical sequences that bore no linguistic pattern. US Signal Intelligence, working alongside the newly formed Strategic Scientific Reserve, attempted to decrypt them but failed to identify the language structure. In December 1946, an OSS linguist noticed something chilling. The encoding method used in the reels was not Japanese, but German. The ciphers matched the transpositional key series used by the Abwehr during the last months of the war. This revelation implied that, at some point between 1944 and 1945, direct radio contact had existed between the Japanese bioweapons program in Manchuria and a German military cipher unit in Europe. Documents unearthed from the US National Archives, declassified in 1998, refer to these reels as Tokyo Cryptograms. They were stored under Operation Paperclip Medical Annex, a secondary branch of the better-known intelligence extraction effort. The medical annex targeted not rocket engineers but doctors, men like General Shiro Ishii, the architect of Unit 731's atrocities in Harbin. In exchange for immunity, Ishii allegedly provided American intelligence with data on human trials involving anthrax, plague, and chemical nerve agents. But the cryptograms suggest there was more. Coordination between Axis partners to conduct synchronized field experiments on opposite sides of the world. In early 1947, a memorandum circulated within Fort Detrick, then the US Army's Biological Warfare Center. It instructed that Project Kitsune materials be subjected to controlled playback using alternate voltage systems to minimize distortion. The memo's second page, partially redacted, mentions recorded vocal anomalies inconsistent with Morse encoding. Surviving technicians described one of the reels emitting a low harmonic vibration that caused physical nausea. When the playback speed was altered, the reel produced audible syllables resembling numbers, count sequences interspersed with place names. Dalian, Krakow, Mukden. Each word corresponded to documented Axis medical testing sites. No one could explain why a German encryption system was used to encode Japanese test data, or how such transmissions had been exchanged across wartime airspace patrolled by Allied forces. The official explanation, offered years later by US Army intelligence, was that the Germans may have transferred cipher equipment to Japan via submarine during the final months of the war. The Kriegsmarine's long-range U-boats, particularly U-864, were known to carry strategic materials eastward. U-864 was sunk off Bergen in February 1945. Its manifest, partially recovered in 2003, listed industrial equipment and medical samples. No mention of cipher reels. In 1952, the reels disappeared from Fort Detrick's inventory. An internal audit marked them as destroyed due to contamination, though no accompanying disposal report exists. A decade later, the CIA's Technical Services Division referenced a recovered linguistic anomaly from paperclip medical reels in a communication to Langley's Behavioral Analysis Branch. The memo simply stated, testing suspended. Exposure to frequency 9.3 MHz induces involuntary recall phenomena. What recall phenomena meant was never clarified. Japanese post-war archives contain only one indirect mention of the project. A logbook from the Army Medical College in Tokyo records a classified radio exercise in March 1945, supervised by Lieutenant Colonel Satoru Kiyoshi. The entry notes a cross-transmission with European collaborator Dr. H.G. The initials may refer to Hauptmann Gustav Heller, a German pathologist known to have worked under SS physician Karl Brandt. Both disappeared before Nuremberg. The Cold War buried the rest. When MacArthur established the Allied Occupation Administration, he ordered the classification of all Japanese biowarfare data under the pretext of preventing Soviet exploitation. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, conducted its own investigations into captured Unit 731 personnel, uncovering similar coded communications in Manchurian archives. Their interrogations revealed a phrase repeated by multiple prisoners. The twin field is alive. Soviet linguists believed twin field referred to synchronized experiments carried out in both hemispheres to test atmospheric dispersion of biological agents. No evidence of such operations has ever been confirmed. In 1973, during a structural renovation at Fort Detrick, workers discovered a small sealed locker behind a false wall in the facility's older section. Inside were several corroded canisters marked Kitsune B, containing glass vials and magnetic tape reels. The contents were immediately seized by US Army Chemical Corps personnel. No official statement followed. However, a retired civilian contractor later claimed that one of the tapes, when played, emitted a pattern of short pulsing tones, identical to a German Enigma machine output. Overlay analysis reportedly revealed the signal frequency matched an experimental broadcast recorded in 1944 from Peenemunde's telemetry division. If these accounts are accurate, the implication is staggering. The Axis powers were not merely exchanging scientific data, they were coordinating a global system of communication designed to transmit across enemy lines under total radio silence. Whether this network served to synchronize weapons tests, intelligence, or something more obscure remains unknown. In 1999, researcher Hiroshi Matsuda of Kyoto University obtained a fragment of an internal memo from the US War Department, dated August 1950, titled Reciprocal Studies, Hemispheric Synchronization Trials. The memo references both Operation Paperclip, Med Tech Annex, and Project Condor, a US Air Force initiative involving electromagnetic resonance. The language implies that data derived from the captured Kitsune reels may have contributed to early American cognitive warfare research. Matsuda's inquiry was dismissed, and he was later found dead in an apparent suicide. His notes were confiscated. Today, the remaining records of the Tokyo Cryptograms reside under joint custody between the US Army Medical Command and the National Security Archive. Of the original 14 reels, only 2 are confirmed extant. Both are sealed in inert gas containers and labeled Restricted Biological Acoustic Encoding. Freedom. of information requests regarding their contents continue to be denied. Historians agree on one fact. These cryptograms represent the final communication between two collapsing empires, a bridge of secrecy stretching from the laboratories of Manchuria to the ruins of Europe. In their static, the echoes of atrocity persist, proof that science, when bound to ideology, can cross oceans and survive nations. What began as a medical experiment ended as a message, one still encrypted by the ghosts of the war that created it. Chapter 5: Ghost Protocols of the Odessa Vaults. In the weeks following the collapse of Berlin in May 1945, Allied intelligence units began tracing the exodus of SS officers fleeing the Reich's ashes. Their destination was not random. Reports collected by the British MI6's Section 9 revealed a coded network known as Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen, Odessa. It was not merely an escape route. It was an infrastructure built before the war had even ended, complete with financial channels, safe houses, and shipping manifests disguised as Red Cross repatriation lists. Beneath its surface moved something far more dangerous than fugitives: files, artifacts, and blueprints bound for exile. The most enigmatic of these shipments carried the codename Edelweiss Phase 2, a series of encrypted communications, intercepted by British intelligence from Buenos Aires in 1948. The transmissions described strategic materials from the Alpine cache. What those materials were has never been officially acknowledged. Fragment of an MI6 report dated August 3, 1949, now partially declassified, lists a recovered cipher referencing a vault facility 7 kilometers east of Bariloche. The message included the initials VS and HG believed to correspond to SS Obersturmbannführer Viktor Schäfer and physicist Heinrich Gernot, both involved in wartime research on fissile materials under the Reich Main Security Office. When British agents arrived in Patagonia posing as Red Cross officials, they found evidence of a recently constructed bunker carved into the rock of Cerro Lopez. Local workers told of German engineers who paid in Swiss marks and carried crates that required 3 men to lift. The crates were labelled with the Reichsadler insignia, though the swastikas had been scratched out. The vault itself was uncovered in 1952 after an Argentine army patrol accidentally collapsed part of its entrance. Inside, investigators found Wehrmacht field uniforms, rusted crates of Mauser rifles, and dozens of sealed lead containers marked Plutonium R. Each bore the seal of the Reich Ministry for Armaments and War Production. The Argentine government immediately denied any involvement, claiming the discovery was a wartime storage site of no significance. However, a week later, the entire cache was quietly turned over to US operatives under Project Quiet Sun, a clandestine intelligence exchange program designed to recover nuclear and aerospace research before the Soviets could. The Quiet Sun files, declassified in 1995, detail the transport of 24 lead containers from Bariloche to the US via the Panama Canal aboard the freighter SS Sylvania. The cargo was logged as mineral samples, yet the manifest contained anomalies. 6 of the container numbers appear again years later in Sandia National Laboratory inventories under legacy isotope cores, origin undetermined. If these were indeed remnants of the Nazi atomic program, their existence would contradict the historical consensus that Germany never achieved significant enrichment capability. Further complicating matters was the discovery of a sealed briefcase in 1978 during renovation work near San Carlos de Bariloche's old airfield. Inside were microfilms of German technical drawings labelled Konstrukt für Geheime Abteilung. The diagrams depicted a cylindrical device combining magnetic rotors and thermal shielding, marked with annotations in both German and Cyrillic script. Intelligence analysts concluded that the vault's contents may have included experimental reactor components later studied independently by Soviet engineers. By the 1980s, rumors of Nazi scientists working in Argentina had become a public fascination. The truth, however, was less visible and far more bureaucratic. A declassified CIA memo from 1953 titled Subject, Odessa Network, Argentina Sector, includes a chilling line: financial assets consolidated into Banco Alemán Transatlantico accounts. Material archives remain under protection of former SS Technical Division. The same document refers to a continuing communication line between Buenos Aires, Madrid, and Cairo, suggesting that Odessa was not a static network but a living organism evolving across continents. Testimony from captured SS officer Klaus Kammler, whose interrogation records were long thought destroyed, adds another layer. A surviving transcript in the US National Archives describes Kammler admitting to overseeing the partitioning of research archives into secure foreign sectors shortly before Berlin's fall. When asked where these sectors were located, he replied, "Where the mountains drink the stars." Historians now believe this was a poetic reference to the Patagonian Andes, whose night sky remains among the clearest on Earth. In 1991, the Argentine newspaper Clarín published leaked photographs showing uniformed men, identifiable as West German Bundeswehr advisors, standing at what appeared to be the same Bariloche vault site. The accompanying article claimed the visit was part of a joint archaeological project. However, subsequent investigation revealed the project's sponsor was a Munich-based defense contractor that had previously supplied electronic components to NATO radar systems. The Argentine government refused. Archaeologist Dr. Elena Richter later led an independent expedition to the area in 2002. Her team found collapsed tunnels extending nearly 200 meters into the granite hillside, supported by concrete older than the surrounding structures. Embedded within the walls were ventilation ducts lined with lead and copper, materials consistent with radiation shielding. Richter also recovered fragments of parchment containing German script and a stylized Edelweiss emblem. Her final report concluded the site was a subterranean laboratory or storage chamber associated with post-war relocation activities. 3 days after her findings were published online, Richter's research servers were seized by Argentine intelligence under national security statutes. She left the country shortly afterward and has not spoken publicly since. The Odessa vaults are more than a legend of fugitive Nazis hiding in South America. They represent a continuity of systems, scientific, financial, and ideological, that transcended the Reich's defeat. What began as an escape network evolved into a Cold War shadow state, trading knowledge and influence between hemispheres. The files of Project Quiet Sun confirm US complicity in this preservation. One internal memo from 1955 reads, "Maintain operational ambiguity. No public acknowledgement of foreign technology transfers. Objective, containment, not exposure." As late as 1976, Argentine intelligence reports describe foreign advisors maintaining a remote installation near Lago Nahuel Huapi, equipped with radar arrays and encrypted radio equipment. Locals called it La Estación Alemana. Satellite images later identified the site as abandoned, but radiation surveys conducted in 1981 showed spikes consistent with residual isotopic material. The readings faded after several months, as though the source had been removed. Today, Bariloche is a tourist destination, its alpine vistas belying the shadows buried beneath. Beneath its serene lakes and ski lodges, the remnants of Odessa's machinery may still lie encased in rock and secrecy. The ghost protocols, encrypted transmissions that once guided fugitives and freight alike, remain dormant frequencies within post-war intelligence archives, sealed not because they hold myth, but because they hold proof. Proof that the war's end was not an ending at all, but a quiet continuation conducted through new channels, hidden behind the same flags that once sought to destroy it. Somewhere in the cold Patagonian soil, the Reich's last experiment sleeps, its guardians long dead, its purpose unresolved, its silence the only witness left to the buried continuity of empire. Every conflict leaves its ghosts, but some never rest. They organize, whisper, and wait. The end of one empire was merely the seed of another, planted in the soil of secrecy and watered by the fear of revelation. From the frozen Arctic to the jungles of forgotten continents, fragments of that hidden order remain, patient and intact. The world moves on, believing the war is over, yet its echoes pulse beneath every classified line and unmarked grave. There are no victors in this kind of silence, only custodians of memory, waiting for the moment when history exhales its final secret. Somewhere, an unopened vault hums softly under the earth, as if remembering the language of its makers. And when it opens, the past won't return. It will simply prove it never left.